You've been in a room with someone less capable than you who keeps advancing while you don't. You've told yourself it's politics, luck, who they know. It's not. It's 9 behaviors you're still running that they already stopped. One of these is going to land. You'll know exactly which one it is. The first behavior is over-explaining your decisions. Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania has spent years studying what separates high performers from people who plateau. Her consistent finding: high performers operate from internal conviction. They don't narrate their reasoning to manage how others perceive them. The over-explanation is the tell. Here's the mechanism exactly. When you explain a decision at length, you're not communicating. You're asking for permission you never needed. The explanation converts your decision into a proposal, and proposals can be rejected. What was yours becomes negotiable the moment you defend it out loud. Intelligent men do this more than anyone else because they have more reasoning available. They can construct a compelling case for almost anything, and they've been rewarded their entire lives for explaining things well. School trained you for this. Every essay, every test, every presentation, show your work. That habit follows you into rooms where showing your work costs you authority. Marcus Aurelius addressed this directly in his journals. He wrote that a man who requires the approval of others for his own choices has handed control of his life to strangers. He was describing over-explanation 2,000 years before the psychology existed. The dark side of this behavior is social. The more you explain, the more people expect explanations. You train the people around you to require justification before they follow you. Eventually, you can't make a decision without a presentation. The authority you were trying to preserve is the authority you spent explaining away. The counter is one rule: state the decision. Stop. If someone needs information to execute it, provide information. Information is not justification. The difference between the two is whether you're asking them to agree. And here's that costs you in practice if you don't apply it. Every time you explain a decision unprompted, you are telling the room that you need them to approve it. Most rooms will accept that invitation. They'll offer edits. They'll introduce doubt. They'll ask follow-up questions that slow everything down. Not because they're adversarial, because you signaled that the decision was open for input. State the decision. Stop. That's the entire counter. The second behavior is strategic overthinking disguised as preparation. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia has studied what he calls the introspection illusion. His finding: when people analyze their own motivations and feelings in depth, they often become less accurate about them, not more. The analysis generates plausible-sounding explanations that replace the real ones. Here's what this looks like for intelligent men specifically. You have a decision to make. You research it. You model the outcomes. You build scenarios. 6 weeks later, you're still building scenarios. You've told yourself, this is diligence. What's actually happening is that your intelligence has found a way to avoid the risk of being wrong by never committing to being right. In 2026, this pattern has an accelerant. The volume of information available for any decision has never been higher. You can always find one more data point, one more angle that hasn't been considered, one more expert who says something different from the last one. The AI tools available now can generate counterarguments to any position in seconds. Intelligent men use this to stay permanently in preparation mode. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like thoroughness. The research from Abdichterhuis at Radboud University is specific about this. For complex decisions involving many variables, deliberate analytical thinking produces worse outcomes than brief analysis followed by a period of non-thinking. The conscious mind is too narrow to hold all the relevant variables simultaneously. It simplifies by focusing on what it most recently evaluated. That's not the full picture. That's the last thing you looked at. The counter is a deadline with a floor, not a ceiling. You're not allowed to decide before you have X pieces of information. You're also not allowed to delay after you have them. The floor protects quality. The ceiling protects you from your own intelligence. Overthinking is invisible from the inside because it feels like work. The next behavior is invisible for a different reason. It feels like strength. The third behavior is performing competence instead of admitting uncertainty. This one is the most expensive behavior on this list and the least visible. Here's the pattern. Someone asks a question you don't fully know the answer to. You give an answer that sounds complete. It contains enough real knowledge to be convincing, but it fills in the gaps with inference presented as fact. You do this automatically. You've done it so many times, it doesn't feel like a choice. David Dunning at the University of Michigan has spent decades studying this. His most significant finding isn't the one most people know. It's not that incompetent people overestimate themselves. It's that competent people in their area of strength develop a specific blind spot. They assume that if something is obvious to them, it's been verified. The fluency of their own thinking feels like evidence. It isn't. In 2026, this behavior gets amplified by AI tools. You can now generate a confident-sounding answer to almost any question in seconds. The answer sounds authoritative. It often contains real information mixed with plausible confabulation. Intelligent men who use these tools without verification start to absorb this pattern. Fluent output starts to feel like reliable output. They're not the same thing. One is a style, the other is a standard. The dark side of performing competence is institutional. Teams that never see their leaders say, "I don't know, let me verify," learn that uncertainty is shameful. They stop surfacing doubt. The organization loses the ability to identify what it doesn't know. That inability is where catastrophic failures come from. Not from what the team knew and got wrong, from what they never said out loud. The counter is one phrase used consistently. "I don't have enough data on that to be confident." Not, "I don't know," which sounds like absence. Not, "let me look into it," which sounds like deflection. "I don't have enough data to be confident." That phrase signals precision, not ignorance. It models the standard you want the people around you to hold. The fourth behavior is treating every conversation as a debate to win. Robert Cialdini at Arizona State University documented something about persuasion that runs counter to what most intelligent men believe. The most persuasive communication doesn't win arguments. It creates the experience of being understood. People change their minds when they feel heard, not when they've been defeated. Intelligent men are trained to find the weakest point in an argument and attack it. This skill works in academic settings. It works in courtrooms. It destroys trust in every other context. Here's what actually happens in the room when you operate this way. You win the exchange. The other person has no more counter-arguments. They go quiet. You interpret the quiet as agreement. What it actually is, they've decided this isn't a person they can think out loud with. They've closed a door. You didn't notice because you were focused on the argument, not the relationship. In 2026, this behavior has a new context. Remote communication strips out most of the social signals that would normally slow this pattern down. On a video call, you don't feel the room shift when you push too hard. You don't see the micro expressions that tell you someone has checked out. The feedback loop that would moderate the behavior in person doesn't exist. Intelligent men in remote environments get worse at this, not better, because they never see the cost. The dark side is strategic. The people who've been argued into silence don't disappear. They form a separate conversation elsewhere. The real decision gets made in the room you weren't in, because that's the room where people can think out loud without being corrected. The counter is one question asked before you speak. Is my goal here to be right or to move forward? Those are different goals. They require different behavior. Knowing which one you're actually pursuing changes what you say next. Winning debates damages the people around you. The fifth behavior damages them without a single argument. They never even knew it was happening. The fifth behavior is holding standards nobody agreed to. This is one of the most common ways intelligent men damage their closest relationships without knowing it. You have a standard. It's clear to you. It seems obvious. You didn't state it because stating it felt unnecessary. The other person failed to meet it. You experienced this as a violation. They experienced it as unexpected. Tasha Eurich at the University of Colorado studied what she calls self-awareness gaps in high performers. Her finding: people who score high on internal self-awareness, knowing their own values and standards deeply, often score lower on external self-awareness, knowing how those standards appear to others. The clearer your internal standard, the more likely you are to assume it's shared. It usually isn't. In workplaces, this pattern compounds over time. The intelligent leader has internalized standards so thoroughly they can't imagine someone not knowing them. Standards about responsiveness, about quality, about how meetings should run, about what counts as being prepared. None of these were ever stated explicitly. All of them are being enforced implicitly. The team experiences this as an unpredictable standard that shifts. What they're actually experiencing is an unstated one that was always there. In 2026, this gets worse in distributed teams. When people aren't in the same room, the ambient transmission of standards that happens through observation doesn't occur. New team members have no way to absorb what you expect by watching you. They have to be told. The assumption that shared context exists when the shared context was always just proximity breaks down completely. The dark side of this behavior is that it creates a specific kind of team member. Someone who stops taking initiative because they can't predict whether their judgment will be validated or penalized. They wait to be told. You interpret the waiting as lack of drive. You created the waiting. State the standard once, explicitly, before you evaluate anyone against it. That's the entire counter. One sentence, before the evaluation, not after. The sixth behavior is optimizing for being impressive instead of being useful. Roy Baumeister at the University of Queensland has studied self-presentation extensively. His research identifies a pattern in high-ability individuals. They allocate cognitive resources toward managing how they're perceived at the cost of actually performing. The performance itself becomes secondary to the narrative around the performance. Intelligent men know how to make things sound significant. This is a real skill. It becomes a problem when the skill starts running ahead of the substance. When you spend more time on how something will land than on whether it actually works. When the framing of the result takes longer than producing the result. When you notice yourself more interested in being credited for the insight than in whether the insight is correct. In 2026, this behavior has a specific modern form. The intelligent man who performs on LinkedIn, who packages every professional experience as a lesson, who builds a personal brand around a version of themselves that needs to be maintained. The performance becomes load-bearing. Decisions start getting made based on what's consistent with the persona, not based on what's actually true or useful. The brand starts running the person. The dark side of this is that it attracts the wrong people and the wrong opportunities. The audience for a performance is people who want to be entertained by that performance. That's a different audience than the people who would bring you the problems worth solving. You end up surrounded by people who admire the presentation while the real work happens somewhere else with someone else. The counter is one question applied to anything you're about to communicate publicly. Would I say this if nobody would know it came from me? If the answer is no, you're performing. If the answer is yes, you're contributing. Those are not the same thing, and they don't produce the same results. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, there is more where this came from. Subscribe to Dark Architect. New video every day. The button is right there. The seventh behavior is confusing complexity with depth. This one is subtle, and it runs in the most intelligent people most reliably. Complexity is the number of moving parts. Depth is the clarity of the underlying principle. They are not the same thing. A complex explanation can be shallow. A simple explanation can be profound. Intelligent men systematically prefer complexity because it signals effort and knowledge. Simple explanations feel like they're leaving something out. They often aren't. They're just not performing the work of knowing. Nassim Taleb, risk analyst and author of The Black Swan, documented the specific damage this causes in professional contexts. Systems built on complex models that nobody fully understands fail in ways that nobody predicted. Not because the model was wrong about the parts, because the complexity made it impossible to see how the parts interacted at scale. The complexity was the problem, not the solution. In 2026, AI tools have made complexity generation trivial. You can now produce a detailed, nuanced, multi-layered analysis of almost anything in minutes. The analysis sounds intelligent. It often is intelligent, but the availability of complexity at zero cost means the signal value of complexity has collapsed. What used to demonstrate that you'd worked hard now just demonstrates that you have access to the same tools everyone else does. The premium now is on clarity, on being able to say the true thing in the fewest words. That is harder than it looks, and it's where intelligent men consistently underperform. The counter is the one-sentence test. Before you communicate anything, write the one true sentence at the center of it, not a summary, not a takeaway, The one sentence that the entire thing is built on. If you can't write it, you don't yet understand what you're saying. If you can write it, ask whether the rest of what you're about to say adds to it or performs around it. The eighth behavior is keeping options open past the point where options help you. Sheena Iyengar at Columbia University has studied choice architecture for decades. Her most replicated finding: beyond a certain number of options, more choice produces worse decisions and more dissatisfaction with the decisions made. The brain experiences unchosen options as losses. The more options you keep open, the more losses you accumulate without ever deciding anything. Intelligent men are drawn to optionality. Closing a door feels like loss. Keeping it open feels like intelligence. It feels like not making a mistake you can't undo. What it actually is: making a different mistake that's harder to see. The cost of unchosen options is real, and it compounds. It lives in the energy you spend maintaining possibilities you'll never pursue, in the relationships that stay undefined, in the projects that stay in planning, in the identity that never fully forms, because forming it would close something off. In 2026, the infrastructure for this behavior has never been better. Subscription models, remote work, digital platforms, AI tools. You can maintain a dozen professional directions simultaneously without committing to any of them. The system is designed to keep you engaged with options. Engagement with options is the product. Your commitment is what gets sold back to the platform as attention. The dark side of this behavior is identity. Shah Davidai at Columbia University published research in 2025 on what he calls the hot/cold empathy gap in regret. His finding: people regret inactions more than actions over time. The things you didn't decide, didn't commit, didn't close hurt you more at 60 than the things you tried and got wrong at 30. Optionality feels safe. The research says it isn't. The counter is a close date. Every open option gets a date by which you'll either commit or close it. Not a deadline for action, a deadline for the decision about action. That distinction matters. You're not being forced to do the thing. You're being forced to decide whether you're doing the thing. That decision alone recovers the energy the open option was consuming. The ninth behavior is making your value illegible to the people who determine your outcomes. This is the one intelligent men resist most because it sounds like self-promotion, and self-promotion feels beneath them. It isn't self-promotion, it's communication. The distinction matters enormously. Frank Flynn at Stanford University has studied what he calls the invisibility trap in high-performing individuals. His finding: people who do excellent work and assume the work will speak for itself are systematically undervalued relative to people doing equivalent work who communicate clearly about what they're doing and why it matters. The work doesn't speak for itself. Work is silent. People speak. What gets valued is what gets narrated. In 2026, this problem has a structural dimension. In distributed organizations, the people making decisions about your trajectory have less visibility into your actual work than at any point in the history of professional life. They see outputs, not process. They see the deliverable, not the 30 decisions that made the deliverable good. The gap between what you know you did and what they can observe you doing is wider than it's ever been. Filling that gap is not bragging. It's signal. The dark side of this behavior is that it's a competitive disadvantage you can't see. The person getting the opportunity you deserved isn't necessarily doing better work. They're doing legible work. Their contribution is visible to the people who make decisions. Yours isn't. You know the quality of what you did. The only people whose opinion changes your outcomes don't. The counter is 1 sentence per project per week to the person it matters to. Not a report, not a summary. 1 sentence, here's what moved this week and why it matters. That's it. Done consistently, it changes how your work is perceived without requiring you to perform or promote. It just makes the invisible visible. 9 behaviors. None of them are stupidity. All of them are intelligence operating without the right frame. The over-explainer, the overthinker, the man who performs competence, the debater, the enforcer of unstated rules, the one who optimizes for impressive, the man who hides depth behind complexity, who keeps every door open. Who does the best work in the room and makes sure nobody sees it? Each one is something your intelligence built. Each one is costing you something your intelligence can't fix alone. The next video is already loaded. It covers the psychology behind how the most disturbing dark psychology facts about human behavior actually work and why understanding them changes every social interaction you'll have from this point forward. Watch it now. Subscribe to Dark Architect. New video every day. No motivation, no fluff, just the mechanism. The problem was never your intelligence. It was what your intelligence was pointed at.